So, I was showing some of the videos the other day. Well, yeah, let's just start with the assignment first. So you've done your presentation. And that is, here we go. It's hard to keep everything organized, isn't it? Every day. Assignments. So here's the next one. This is called Social Work Diversity. I'm actually combining two of the papers that are on the syllabus, so you only have one here and then the final.
Okay.
To streamline
So 3
it.
more assignments left. 4.
Right, but if you've already done the one, like you've already done the presentation,
Yeah.
you would just have this. So, and it's just 2 pages. It's easy. So, explain how prejudice of anyone has an impact on clients and, in general, the extent to which cultures, structures, and values may oppress, marginalize, alienate, create, or enhance privilege or power in relation to a client. I'm going to do that. A client, because I did change it so it includes this. Students write a 2-page essay discussing racial and cultural aspects of any case and how it impacts social work practice. One description I had given was that you could do redlining, and it's because a lot of students haven't heard of it, and that's okay if you haven't. So here's a quick one. What is redlining? Because this is racial.
What is redlining? Redlining is a discriminatory lending practice denying access to federally backed mortgages and loans to certain communities based on race and ethnicity. It all started in the 1930s. During the housing crisis of the Great Depression, real estate moguls such as Springfield's Harry Kissel laid the groundwork for the National Housing Act of 1934. From this, a federal agency was formed, Homeowners Loan Corporation. With it, residential security maps that became the standard to determine the best places for housing investments. White communities with strong racially restricted deeds were given a grade A rating and identified as desirable for lending purposes, while Black communities, regardless of their economic status, were given a grade D rating and branded as hazardous and high risk. No federally backed loans would be made there. Redlining locked out millions of Americans from accessing mortgages and stunted opportunities for Black families to build wealth and pass down to future generations. Although the practice of redlining was outlawed with the signing of the 1968 Fair Housing Act, the damage was done. Segregation was embedded in our cities and suburbs. Living in segregated communities has modern-day consequences, including sharp disparities in family wealth, education, and life expectancy. These maps were made more than 80 years ago, and yet they still tell a story that impacts us today, the story of redlining.
So that's just a quick synopsis, so you could get into, like, have you ever heard a mortgage before?
Yes.
And do your family, parents, whomever rents, own, or buy their house today?
Well, my nana, she bought her house. And
Okay.
she owned the house next door to us and the house up the street.
Oh, that's nice.
Yes.
Okay, how are you? Were you presenting? I can't remember.
No, I presented on Monday.
Okay, that's what I thought. I'm just keeping them all straight so you can post the YouTube of your video into the turn-in assignment. I was doing some more redlining videos talking about how,
That diversity thing.
yeah, for the diversity paper. So this is an example you could use.
Say the word redline in Boston, and most people think of a T, but for decades, redlining was a practice that actively created racially segregated neighborhoods in cities across the country, including Boston. Stephanie Lydon tells us about an exhibit that explores how it created boundaries and disparities that carry on into today.
At age 68, Paula Corgay contemplates retirement but works a lot. As a teacher's aide, and from her Roxbury home, crafting clothes from African cloth. Every bit helps to pay the rent.
And these are my parents.
Owning a
watched
home
this one
has
already?
long been an elusive goal for her family.
My mother always wanted to buy a house. When we were in the projects, my father had a really good stable job. He made decent money.
But like most people of color in that era, he could not get a home loan.
So this is the 1960s.
Yes,
Growing up in the 1950s and 60s, she watched as white neighbors left and Roxbury struggled. What she didn't know then was how explicitly race informed federal policy that shaped neighborhoods for haves
Blue and green are the most desirable areas.
and have-nots.
Red is considered hazardous and undesirable.
April DeSimone is part of a team that produced this exhibit on the history of how neighborhoods like Roxbury were redlined. In the 1930s, the federal government created color-coded maps. They were a guideline for banks. Blue and green meant a neighborhood was a safe place for banks to back loans. Red was high risk, something determined largely by who lived there.
In the survey, you have the word Negro asking what is the percentage of Negroes that live in this area?
Foreign-born residents, Irish, Italians, Jews, also reduced a neighborhood's value. But after World War II, their status changed and they joined an exodus from the city to the suburbs where home ownership helped create the country's middle class. Meanwhile, federal guidelines continued to promote racial segregation.
If a neighborhood is to retain stability, it is necessary that property shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes,
These policies, she says, not just in Boston, but urban centers nationwide,
not of the white or Caucasian race.
answer a question that resonates today.
Why are we in a hyper-segregated America?
Redlining, she says, not only excluded people from owning and potentially profiting from a home, but confined them to areas of concentrated poverty and little investment. Until recently.
As you see, there's tons of development happening all around here.
Alex Ponte Cabayan is a housing rights organizer. He grew up here in Jamaica Plains, Eggleston Square, a once red-line neighborhood where more than a third of the residents make less than $25,000 a year.
This building here, rents are gonna look like $4,000 to $5,000 even for a 3-bedroom.
And so for the people who've lived here for generations, by and large,
It's not housing for them.
rising rents, he says, are forcing many longtime residents out. As for the people with the means to move in, he says they're likely from communities where the color on a long ago map was something other than red. Stephanie Lighton, WGBH News.
Oops. So that is some of the stuff on redlining. A lot of times the next step is actually gentrification displacement. And that's something that I had to fight with my early years in social work about gentrification. Did any of you guys hear what happened at the University of Kentucky this weekend?
Was the racist stuff? Yeah, I seen on social media.
So I was going to say that is a very specific outward issue that could happen. I would hope it wouldn't happen up here, but I guess, nowadays we have all kinds of weird stuff go on. So, that didn't get it. Let's see here. I don't even know if I heard if you just search University of Kentucky, there. Okay, so that one was on CNN. So this would obviously be a more dramatic, specific incident, but because it did happen, it's something to consider. Have you seen this yet? This apparently made all over in, I guess it was over the weekend.
The holidays were lonely times.
The little blonde girl was drinking
I mean, it's hard when people don't
and
know
acting a
things
fool.
exist.
So
But after saving big with early Black Friday deals at
I feel
Amazon,
like they always make you watch a
Yet he
whole
became
bunch of
more.
commercials. They won't even let you go back, huh? So this is something that went on. Okay. Lover girl said, "Did you receive my email?" If it was sent during class time, I don't know if I would have seen anything. So here's, I guess, the aftermath there of
every 4 years, something comes around where billions become a national team coach. And we learned that soccer was not just a sport, it's a movement that gives us the belief that we are all capable of great things. Inspiration, it's in all of us. Kia, movement that inspires.
A march and rally tonight at the University of Kentucky campus, where video shows a Black student being confronted with racist slurs and being insulted by a white student who'd been drinking early Sunday morning. WHS 1119's Tom Lally has more from Lexington on the voices of support for Kyla Spring, the young woman who was assaulted.
Hundreds of students and supporters echoed familiar chants through the UK campus, with one name at the center.
My name is Kyla Spring. Say your name.
Kyla Spring is a freshman in her first semester at UK. She was working the front desk at Boyd Hall early Sunday morning when a white student, Sophia Rosing of Northern Kentucky, repeatedly tried to hit her and use racial slurs.
This is a recurring issue in and across American school systems, no matter what age. I'm deeply saddened by the events that took place, but I am most grateful for justice that is to come. And to Miss Rosing, you will not break my spirit.
Kyla's family, in from Memphis, marched by her side and thanked the crowd for their support.
But do not let it stop here. It is uncomfortable to sit in silence and watch and feel helpless. But it's more uncomfortable to watch it happen over and over again.
This rally was organized by students who wanted to create a more open dialogue on issues faced at UK.
We just want to make sure that university can hear students' voices and how we can change the culture here at the University of Kentucky.
I just want to say the University of Kentucky has reacted very poorly. All I've seen is that she's been arrested and she got a couple of charges. She is still a student at UK.
We thank you. We're grateful for you. But we charge you to not just let this be a moment. Let this be a movement.
The University of Kentucky condemned what happened on Sunday and says the Office of Student Conduct immediately began a disciplinary review. In Lexington, Tom Lally, WHAS 11, on your side.
So that's another.
Hey guys, we are giving out a ton of these DeWalt samples.
More outward thing that you could write about.
So you can write about that for the diversity or something?
Right. I would say these would be something that has a little bit more policy involved. And then, yeah, if you have some good research and links on that, that one could be something you could do. And then,
I don't know how much is out there on that.
right.
Incident already.
Right. Because it just started. Right.
It sounds like they haven't even. To me, I would have thought the school would have like expelled the girl or suspended her or something.
Right. Yeah. She shouldn't finish there for sure.
But maybe it's to come in the future or something. But definitely should be some more disciplinary action than just.
Right. Yeah.
What do you think?
A typical American moves.
I mean, it looks like if she touched her, that's assault and battery.
And she did try to punch her.
I think she assaulted a police officer. I think almost sounds like she was blacked out. Like if you're like
Probably woke up and-
swinging at everybody and assaulting a police officer, yeah, the next morning she'd be like, oh wow, like
probably
maybe
woke up and-
drug and alcohol treatment would be in the future for you. You know, like that's none of it is a good excuse. That's a possibility. Let's see here. Oh, Elijah wants to present on the 18th, and I said okay. So, but Lover Girl says that has. Let's see here. I don't think I got any emails from that. So also with lower income communities, gentrification is something that happens. You might see it in other bigger cities. Have you guys ever heard of this? What cities are you from again? You always have to remind me. Columbus? And which city are you from?
I'm from Columbus.
They have a lot of gentrification, actually. Which one are you from? Cleveland has a lot of gentrification. So you'll see this and it might look familiar.
Over 11 times in their lifetime. Mobility is part of the American experience and can signify exciting changes. But sometimes people are forced to move against their will. This can take different forms: an eviction, an extreme rent increase, foreclosure on a property owner, or even demolition of a home. These types of moves are displacement, and they disrupt people's lives. In some cases, displacement can leave people without any other housing options. They may find themselves living in shelters, cars, or on the street. One of the most commonly talked about forms of displacement is eviction. Millions of Americans are evicted every year, and evictions are beginning to be recognized as a national epidemic. Some groups are more likely to experience evictions and displacement than others. For example, a study in Milwaukee revealed that 8% of white renters experienced evictions, compared to 15% of Black renters and 29% Hispanic renters. On the whole, low-income households are particularly vulnerable to evictions. But evictions are not the only way displacement happens. Often referred to as soft evictions, landlords may put pressure on tenants to move by engaging in harassment, cutting off utilities, removing parking, ignoring requests to fix appliances, or failing to address other substandard conditions that threaten the health and safety of tenants. Extreme rent increases are another means of displacement. When rent is suddenly increased past what a family can afford, they're left with no choice but to leave their home. Even moves that seem voluntary may in fact be displacement when you look under the surface. For example, it is displacement when a young adult wants to move out of their parents' home, but has their options constrained by prohibitively expensive housing. They may be faced with a choice between staying put or moving out of their neighborhood altogether. When a family has to find a new home or has to move outside of their community, they may find themselves far away from their families and friends and possibly from their jobs and key service providers. This can lead to increased stress and even depression, impacting parents and their ability to support their families. Displacement pressures hit economically unstable families the hardest. When low-income households have to leave their homes, they often move to even lower-income neighborhoods. These kinds of moves can affect life chances, as neighborhood conditions can have lasting impacts on health, educational outcomes, and earnings potential. For one, studies show that your zip code is actually more important than your genetic code in determining life expectancy. And living in a high-poverty, under-resourced neighborhood has been shown to lower children's test scores and their earnings in adulthood. So while displacement is often seen as the effect of poverty, displacement to worse-off neighborhoods can actually intensify poverty conditions and inhibit economic mobility, leading to a vicious cycle. Regardless of the type of neighborhood a displaced family moves into, Forced moves can have especially negative consequences for children. Kids often switch schools due to displacement, which is disruptive to their education. And even when they don't change schools, studies show that moving around can negatively affect their academic performance. Children's health can also be affected by displacement. Research has shown that children who move more often show higher levels of behavioral and emotional problems, increased teenage pregnancy rates, and increased adolescent depression. Taking a step back, it's critical to consider how displacement affects not just individuals and families, but also whole communities. Residents who live far away from other members of their community may have less political power as voting blocks are diluted and communities become less organized, weakening their ability to advocate for needed changes. Displacement is complex, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution for ending it. However, there are strategies that can slow it down. A range of policies, programs, and financing tools are needed to protect renters from formal and informal displacement pressures, facilitate the production of more affordable housing, and preserve and upgrade the existing affordable housing stock. Involving community residents in planning and decision-making about their neighborhood and region can and should be a key piece of all three of these strategies. Taken together, these strategies can help ensure that as new investments take shape across our cities and regions, they generate equitable and healthy opportunities for everyone.
Do you guys know how much rent is up where you're from?
I know it went up, like within the past year. Something like one bedroom be like 1,000,
Right.
1,200.
It's crazy. Yes. Okay, here's another good quick one that exposes, there's a documentary about the redlining and what it does to neighborhoods and the overall wealth gap.
What is the racial wealth gap? The typical white family has nearly 8 times the wealth of the typical Black family, according to the 2019 survey of consumer finances. The median wealth of white families is more than $188,000, while the median wealth of Black families is just over $24,000. Wealth represents the total amount of financial assets an individual or a family owns. This includes bonds, stocks, private pensions, and most importantly, the property an individual or family owns. 2/3 of the wealth for a median household comes from the value of their home. Due to federal and local housing policies like redlining, however, Black families have fared far worse over time. Take a look at 2 neighborhoods. This is the federal map of Dayton from 1937. An all-white neighborhood is green, given a grade A rating, meaning that loans were encouraged. The all-Black neighborhood is redlined and given a grade D rating, meaning that no federally backed loans could be made. October 2020 median home sale prices from Redfin.com reveals the stark differences of the median home sale prices from those same 2 neighborhoods. This is one example of the significant repercussions redlining has had on the wealth-building power of the Black community. Many of those repercussions continue to this day. The racial wealth gap is even wider now than it was in 1968, making the need to understand its root causes even more urgent.
I think those 2 neighborhoods they mentioned were Dayton, so they're actually kind of local too. And then the last one I'm finishing with is that cartoon. So, any thoughts about redlining or like what it can do to neighborhoods? You even see it as you drive through the city. You ever drive through the city and you can just see the difference in neighborhoods? Like, oh, that's a wealthier neighborhood. So this one will break it down with the cartoon.
Redlining has a long, profound reach, and it continues to affect people of color in many aspects of their lives, especially their health, as you'll see in this video. After the Great Depression in the 1930s, President FDR wanted to bring economic relief to Americans. But let's preface this with the fact that it was the 1930s, so his concern was really for white Americans. The federal government started a series of programs called the New Deal. Besides increasing the housing stock, the New Deal purposefully segregated white Americans from Black Americans, immigrants, and Latinos. The New Deal offered incentives for whites to move out of inner city neighborhoods to the suburbs, a phenomenon known as white flight. by providing mortgage programs with targeted eligibility. The New Deal introduced legislation called the National Housing Act of 1934 to make housing and mortgages more accessible and affordable for white Americans. To further perpetuate segregation, the Homeowners Loan Corporation introduced a system of mapping of neighborhoods in cities across America called redlining. The HOLC graded and color-coded neighborhoods into 4 categories based on racial qualifications. Neighborhoods graded as A were best, B was still desirable, C was definitely declining, and D was hazardous. The government backed $120 billion in low-cost home loans between 1934 and 1962. More than 98% of the loans went to white home buyers. African-American families were prohibited from buying homes in the suburbs and gained none of the equity appreciation that whites gained. While white neighborhoods flourished, low-income minority neighborhoods attracted factories with dangerous pollutants, resulting in numerous health concerns. By policy, Black people were forced into neighborhoods that were underdeveloped. Also, as a result of redlining, public and private investments were blocked in Black neighborhoods. Property values decreased, city services were unreliable, crime increased, and a host of other inequities arose. This included disparities in health and education because local property taxes pay for our schools, hospitals, and other resources. Housing segregation was banned in 1968. It didn't matter. The government had already been successful in creating the wealth gap between white and Black home ownership. Today, for every $100 held by a white family, Black families have $5.04. The effects of redlining still permeate our cities. Although it has evolved somewhat, it is still practiced in New Jersey, home of RWJ Barnabas Health. Banks no longer openly talk about explicitly denying Black people loans. Instead, some banks have quietly institutionalized bias in their operations. As recently as 2022, Hudson City Savings Bank settled a housing discrimination lawsuit in Hudson County for about $33 million, the largest redlining settlement in U.S. history. Today, homes in Black neighborhoods are valued at 20% lower than those in white neighborhoods. Many counties provide resources for illnesses based on a 3-4-50 framework. There are 3 behaviors that affect 4 health conditions that contribute to 50% of all deaths. The 3 behaviors are physical inactivity, inadequate diet, and tobacco use. When there are few green spaces, trails, and fitness clubs in neighborhoods, then people don't get enough physical activity. When there are little to no grocery stores, people do not get adequate nutrition. And when the availability of tobacco and alcohol is higher in neighborhoods, then that brings on additional health problems. Healthy living should be a right for everyone. However, one of the consequences of redlining is that many people live in food deserts. Food deserts are low-income communities where access to affordable, healthy food is limited or non-existent because grocery stores are too far away. The absence of affordable, healthy food, mostly in urban and rural communities, contributes to poor diet, obesity, and other diet-related illnesses. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, about 23.5 million people live in food deserts. This includes approximately 2.3 million people who live in low-income rural areas, do not have access to a vehicle, and are more than 10 miles from a supermarket. In New Jersey, the USDA has identified 134 food deserts, which affects approximately 340,000 residents. Additionally, the Reinvestment Fund, a nonprofit organization, has identified 10% of New Jersey's population, 924,000 residents, as food insecure, even if not in a federally recognized food desert. To be food secure means there is adequate food available and an individual has the ability to access it. In spite of the generational effects of racism and redlining, many healthcare organizations are going beyond the hospital to address food insecurity and health disparities in New Jersey. RWJ Barnabas Health has created a program called Health Beyond the Hospital to address not only food insecurity, but other social determinants such as housing, income, and education, which all have significant effects on health outcomes. RWJBH is also committed to equity. Ending Racism Together focuses on creating racial, ethnic, and cultural equity, prioritizing those communities that are most disenfranchised. For more information on these programs, or to learn more about initiatives from RWJ Barnabas Health, visit our website at rwjbh.org/Health Beyond the Hospital.
All right, so those are some of the the links and the videos that you can use for, examples of, you would think that it's ended by now, but there's clear disparities that are showing up, like they're doing a lot of disparities in health and affecting communities. So any questions? I see a couple online. Do you guys have any questions about the final, the next paper, the presentation?
A little bit for the diversity stuff. So it's like we just have to write about what diversity is, or do we have to give an example and then what do we have to?
This is a great example because it's more specific of how the diverse neighborhoods and even some of the disparities affect folks. Like there's less services, there is less money for public schools, there was therefore not as good of a public school and like education. So it's kind of just like digging in, and here's the specific directions. It would say, as I think I also just edited this thing. So it's only 2 pages, and then write a 2-page essay, explain how prejudice of anyone has an impact on a client in general and the extent to which culture structures, like it could be housing, it could be a few other things, values might oppress, marginalize, and alienate, or enhance privilege or power in relation to a client. Because as a social worker, we're going to see clients of every different race, culture, religion, creed. And some places it could be that they still don't want women to get a job or women to go out and work or things of that nature. That's where you could see it, not just with like race and culture, but also religion, where it's like you got to stay covered and just have your eyes shown, like that's another example. And it's actually illegal maybe for them to work in other countries like Iraq or Iran or one of the other countries that we see. And then I combined this one onto it. So you can do this also. Just write a 2-page essay discussing racial and cultural aspects of any case and how it impacts social work practice.
So that's a whole nother different paper.
No, you just do the 2 pages. You can add all of this in.
Okay.
It was going to be 2 separate page papers, but I threw them all into the same assignment where you guys can just show how it affects, if it is religion, if it is culture, if it is, there's even some showing that for whatever reason, diabetes affects races differently too. I didn't know that. Like diabetes, for whatever reason, is much more prevalent in some cultures than others. And they still don't know how. Disparities. So they're still doing like research on it, but it shows up with, different challenges that come up, but most specifically, in like in India, it's probably the worst actually. So folks get diabetes more often in India for whatever reason. Some say it could be relation to vitamin D, like the darker that your skin is, the less vitamin D you absorb through the sun. So that's another example. And if you guys think of one on your own, that's fine too. But I just wanted to give out things that we would see in communities and things that are still present nowadays. So somebody wants to present on the 18th and then 16th or 17th. So we're in class on the 15th and the 17th next week. Then we get a whole week off, don't we? Damn. So yeah, you can present on the 17th, but not the 16th. You can't present on the 18th, but you could on the 15th. It's got to be Tuesday or Thursday. Unless if you film at YouTube Live. It's another way to get around it. So, any other questions? I see that we're down to a few left on here.